Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Saturday, August the 8th, 2020.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. As long as there was such a base, I felt strongly that it was necessary to see the constitutional process through to its conclusion, that to do otherwise would be unfaithful to the spirit of that deliberately difficult process and a dangerously destabilizing precedent for the future. But with the disappearance of that base, I now believe that the constitutional purpose has been served, and there is no longer a need for the process to be prolonged. I would have preferred to carry through to the finish, whatever the personal agony it would have involved. And my family unanimously urged me to do so. But the interests of the nation must always come before any personal considerations. From the discussions I have had with congressional and other leaders, I have concluded that because of the Watergate matter, I might not have the support of the Congress that I would consider necessary to back the very difficult decisions and carry out the duties of this office in the way the interests of the nation will require. I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad. To continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Incredible. That was Richard Milhous Nixon. Exactly 46 years ago today, on August the 8th, 1974, announcing his resignation from the office of President of the United States. Richard Nixon, a Republican who was a crook, despite his press conference previously where he declared, "I am not a crook. I've earned everything." You know, even Richard Nixon, a traitor, by the way, to the United States, in 1968 when he scuttled the South Vietnamese peace talks in Paris, got Anna Chennault involved to tell the South Vietnamese to step away from the table. in the promises of a better deal if and when he got elected, because he was running for president in 68. And Lyndon Baines Johnson was not going to run again. He had announced in, I believe it was 1968, March of 68, that he was not going to seek the nomination or accept the nomination for the presidency of the United States at the Democratic National Convention. That year, 1968, was an incredible year, as I've alluded to before. But Richard Nixon that year was running for office. He was running for office as president, and he was treasonous, traitorous to the country. He was a treason. He's committing treason. Compromising a sitting U.S. president in LBJ and telling the South Vietnamese, no, hold off with the peace talks to end the Vietnam War. Hold off. I can get you something better. Once I'm elected in November, I promise you that once I get sworn in January, I will get you something better. And the South Vietnamese actually did walk away, and the war continued on for a few more years. Incredible. And even this guy, even Richard Nixon, said that I must put the national affairs ahead of my personal endeavors and ambitions. That's what he said. You heard that, pretty much what he said in that address I just played for you. 46 years ago today, he said that America needs a full-time president. And America needs a full-time Congress. Those words from someone who committed treason, who was pardoned, of course, by Gerald Ford for Watergate, which is why Nixon resigned. Nixon, of course, won that 68 election. There was so much turmoil on the Democratic side and turmoil in the country, it was impossible to see the Democrats winning. After everything that had happened, the Vietnam War had escalated under Johnson. With the Gulf of Tonkin incident, really that was the thing that really broke the camel's back, got us full square here in the country, in the U.S., to the Vietnam War. All of the turmoil. There was no way the Democrats were going to win the White House. And then what happened at the Chicago Convention, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 68? Absolutely no. It wasn't going to happen. Nixon coming in with law and order and all of this. There was no chance for the Democrats in 68. But Nixon telling you America needs a full-time president. I mean, I think that those words ring very loudly here in 2020. Especially when the individual who calls himself a president is on the golf course every day, on Twitter every day. They had golf courses in Nixon's day. Yeah, sure, they didn't have social media. But the point is that there is no full-timer in the White House. There isn't even a part-timer in the White House. And as for the Congress, Mitch McConnell, since Nixon was talking about America needs a full-time Congress, Mitch McConnell has gone AWOL. Oh, you couldn't stop seeing him on Capitol Hill a few months ago when it was all about getting PPP for these big businesses and, oh, we need these liability protections for companies and for employers. We need liability insurance so that workers don't sue these companies. Never mind worrying about paying these folks a living wage. Never mind that. No call for increasing the minimum wage or increasing the wages of the everyday worker. But all of this rigmarole, oh, you can't get $600 because you might not work. Yeah, right. You know, that's the kind of thing that this part-time Congress does under Mitch McConnell. And it's not the Congress, it's the Republicans in Congress, in the House, in the Senate. gone AWOL. When it comes to you and your interests, the Republicans are nowhere to be found because they do not care about you. So that I play to start this episode of the podcast. And the episode today is going to be about a bit about Richard Nixon and about a bit about the guy in the White House now, but also as well a bit about what happened at the forum last night that I hosted for the very important film that you must see called I Am Not Your Negro. It's a documentary that is available on Netflix now. It is directed by Raoul Peck and it features James Baldwin. And I'm going to be actually playing a couple of clips from it just a little bit later on. So please stay tuned for that. These are very brief clips that you will hear. But when I come back, a bit more about Richard Nixon and a little bit more about who is currently in the White House right now. And I would argue that it's not even Donald Trump. I'll tell you the answer to why I think that is. Why I think that is in just a moment. Welcome back. So on this date, 46 years ago, August the 8th, 1974, Richard Nixon announced his resignation. And it was something that was expected. And he spoke for, I think, something like 20 minutes. I played you the first 4 minutes or so of the 20-minute or so speech that he gave. And it was expected. He was essentially told to resign. And Barry Goldwater, of all people, who had run for the presidency just 10 years before, in 64, and he was sensationally defeated. He was roundly crushed in a landslide win for LBJ that year. But Barry Goldwater he didn't walk into Nixon, but I guess he did. He walked into the Oval Office and spoke to Richard Nixon and said, "Mr. President, I want to let you know," and he said this in 1974, in the month of August, he said, "Mr. President, I want to let you know that you do not have the votes. They are going to vote to impeach you. If this vote is had on the House floor, if this vote is had on the Senate floor, if this vote is had in the House, they're going to vote to impeach you." And word has it from the Senate that it's not looking good for you. They will vote to remove you from office. Spare us this national nightmare. Right? This is what Ford said, our long national nightmare is over. I believe it was Jerry Ford when Jerry Ford took over. Watergate was a national nightmare, but that was not the only national nightmare going on. You had the Vietnam War raging on. You had hundreds of thousands, millions of Vietnamese murdered, slaughtered. You had 58,000 American military personnel killed as well in that war. The war was going on. There was division and dissent in the United States. There was a mini civil war of sorts between those who wanted to continue the war machine and the profiteering and the military-industrial complex, the very military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had warned against. The Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a military general himself, had warned against in his outgoing farewell address, his presidential farewell address in January of 1961. So the lesson was not learned. there was this division between those who wanted the war profiteering to continue and those who were against the stinking war. We don't want you, and they didn't say stinking. We don't want your stinking war, your effing war. You know, the anti-war people who said, we've had enough of this. We are against this war. It's immoral, it's illegal, it's wrong, and it is defiling the United States and what it is supposed to stand for. And LBJ caught the brunt of that, which is why LBJ did not want to run again and said he wouldn't run again. And the reason why the immensely popular Hubert Humphrey did not win is because Humphrey, even though he was popular, was seen as an extension of LBJ. And that was a narrow loss, by the way. Nixon barely won that election in 1968. It was really close. Even with all the dissent in 1968 in the Democratic Party and in the country. But Nixon saw the handwriting on the wall and he quit. I'm not a quitter. But he did quit. He left and he did the right thing. Despite being a treasonous human being and someone who was a crook, he was a criminal. I mean, this guy, and he was a racist. He had wrote these racist things about black people and anti-Semitic things about Jewish people, and that did, and Henry Kissinger was his Secretary of State. Henry Kissinger is Jewish. Didn't stop Richard Nixon, of course, from being an anti-Semite. It didn't stop Richard. And by the way, Kissinger was also the National Security Advisor. Or the Defense Secretary. He held these two titles at once. I think he was both Defense Secretary and Secretary of State at the same time. Or he was National Security Advisor and Secretary of State at the same time. Incredible. It didn't stop Nixon from being anti-Jewish. It's incredible, remarkable, quite frankly. And what Kissinger did in Cambodia? My goodness me. See, this is the history. But the history is the present. And as William Faulkner said, we're not through the past. The past isn't even past at all. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. James Baldwin says, we are our history. History is not the past, it is the present. And we're criminals if we pretend otherwise. We are our history. And so when people say this is not America, politicians in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party saying this is not America, they are ahistoric and they are dishonest. And it's shocking. Some of those politicians saying that are black. And that makes me far less inclined, even less inclined to trust them. White politicians say it too. And I'm not going to trust them. And then when a black politician says that, myself as a black man, my ears not only perk up, but my eyes narrow with a great deal of suspicion. This is not America? Really? Where have you been? Black politician saying that nonsense. Where have you been? I'm not going to name names. Except one of them's being considered for Joe Biden's VP. I'm not going to name any names, however. Oh, dear. Well, but Richard Nixon did the right thing. He left office. And that scandal, the Watergate scandal, was a big freaking deal. When those crooks broke in to the Watergate Hotel where the Democrats were, and they got the DNC's materials, That was a huge story in this country. Now, these days, when the Mueller report comes out and says that the DNC was hacked by the Russians and their servers were hacked by the Russians, barely a whisper and a ripple in the media and in the public. 400-page plus report, people don't read it. Oh, it's 400 pages. Let me tell you, if it was 400 pages of naked women on there, your ass would read it. Your ass would be looking at every freaking page. Oh, I read Playboy for the articles. Come on, people. I mean, look, there are people who read Playboy for the articles. There are people who read Playgirl. Does that even exist anymore? Playgirl? For the articles. I've never read Playgirl. I wouldn't know. I have read Playboy before for the articles. But I've not read Playgirl, so it's not in my area of expertise. Nor is Playboy, by the way. I mean, it's not like I don't make a hobby or any kind of thing about. But I'll say this: if you want to find some really good stories, and I'm not joking here. If you really want to find some very good interviews that have been done, particularly in the 1960s and 70s, read Playboy. I'm not joking now, right? Please, some of the best interviews and the most candid interviews have been done in Playboy. And whether it's Malcolm X or James Baldwin or Bud Schulberg, numerous women who have been profiled and publicized, and I mean women speaking in articles. I'm not talking about women with no clothes on. You read some of those great stories from the 60s and 70s, some of these terrific interviews that were done. Long-form interviews, people being candid on the record. There was one even more recently that I saw online with Sam Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson did one that I thought was really illuminating. Then there was one with John Mayer where he admitted to his racism, where he said things about black women that were racist and misogynist and misogynoir. And he talked about all of that. I mean, there are these interviews in there that are quite candid, are very candid. So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But the point I'm making is that today, the criminality of this guy in the White House is barely making news. And part of the reason why that is the media is literally reporting this stuff like tabloid journalism, tabloid news. They're reporting it like ET Entertainment Tonight used to report in the 1980s. All sizzle and really no steak. And I liked Entertainment Tonight, Mary Hart in the 80s, John Tesh, Lisa Gibbons, and there was this other guy now, Jim, the guy that's the lawyer on CNN, Jim, and I forget his last name. Whatever his last name is, I know. He's still around, Jim somebody. Had these big eyes, brown eyes, white guy, Jim, whatever. But anyway, I know you know who he is. And E.T., I used to love Entertainment Tonight. Used to love it. I even appeared on that show once because I was protesting against the racist depictions and the stuff that was going on with the book Bonfire of the Vanities, which is a fascinating book written by Tom Wolfe. But the darn book, which is a good book actually, was being made into a movie. And they were filming it in the Bronx, and there was all kinds of stuff in there. It's like, wait a minute, you're going to film this here? And I was taking the position that people should boycott this thing. Now, people may laugh at that now. I might even laugh at that now. But I appeared in video. I gave a comment to someone from Entertainment Tonight. My name was up. I still have the video of this somewhere. And this is in the 80s or early 90s. And my name is up there. And I said, look, I think we should... Boy, and I led, and they led the broadcast with me. And then they played my comment again. Well, that's the only reason they would lead it with me, is because I said something that perhaps may seem a little absurd now. Or maybe not. But my whole point is that Entertainment Tonight did this reporting on the movies, and it was just great stuff. And now CNN and MSNBC and all these stations report what Trump does, his illegality and his criminality and his corruption and his deviance. They report it like Entertainment Tonight. And that's very sad. That's a really sad thing. They report it like Inside Edition, like TMZ, like the National Enquirer. And there's no analysis, there's no context. And it's all, big scoop here, big scoop there. There's a few people who don't do this, like Rachel Maddow. She goes into deep dives on this stuff. There's context, there's background, there's education. But the reason why the criminality of this guy in the White House now does not make any real ripples is because there's A, so much of it. B, the media is asking the wrong question. Instead of asking the tough question, they're asking the wrong question. So you've only got one reporter, and there's a few others like Paula Reed of CBS and Weia Zhang of CBS and Yamiche of PBS. Of course, women are asking their questions that, men aren't asking these questions, except Jonathan Swan, and Jonathan Swan gets the biggest applause of all, right? When Yamiche, has been asking these questions for years about this guy Trump. Weia Zhang has been asking these questions of years about this guy. Paula Reed, they've all, and others, April Ryan. They've all been asking these questions about Donald Trump, right? And, they get a little praise here and there. But Jonathan Swan, I got nothing. I think Jonathan Swan does do a good job, but let's not elevate him now to sainthood because he freaking interviewed Donald Trump the right way. That's a sad commentary on us that we would praise him that much, number one, and number two, that there's very few freaking journalists out here who are willing or able or wanting to ask the critical questions of this criminal in the White House. Because they all want access. Because the minute that the average person asks, the minute that the average reporter asks the question about Donald Trump, they're not going to get access. And so we're going to revoke your press pass, Jim Acosta of CNN. Remember when they did that to him? They revoked his press pass for a week or so? Or 2 days or a week, and he had to fight to get it back, and the White House correspondents got involved, and they finally gave his press pass back to him, his credential. See, he did that. He violated the First Amendment by yanking his press pass from him. Jim Acosta raises the critical questions too. I don't want to forget him. Because he does. Jim Acosta raises critical questions. And there, occasionally Jonathan Call, occasionally Peter Alexander. But let's not get carried away here. And that's why I think a lot of these reporters don't ask the critical questions. They're afraid they won't get access and their media organization won't have someone in the room where it happened. That's what I think is going on as well. But there's a laziness too. There's a laziness in the press. A laziness. And Jonathan Swan, Yamiche, Paula Reed, Weia Zhang, and a couple of others, they're not standing for this. They're not taking it. And that's why you see that Trump is scared stiff. He doesn't point and he doesn't call on Yamiche anymore. right? He doesn't call on Yamiche. He doesn't call on Weah Zhang. He doesn't call on, he doesn't call on Paula Reed, barely. Caitlin Collins is another one who raises critical questions. Can't forget her. She still gets called on, though, And she raises critical questions. But he won't call on Yamiche. He won't call on Yamiche. And barely calls on, Weah Zhang does get some, but he won't call on Yamiche. Very rarely. Because she's going to raise a question about him. People have got to start, if you're in the press and you're in that room, you've got to ask those questions or you're failing at your job. You can't have a guy in a job in the White House who's failing every day and failing to the death and to the tune of 162,000 people dead, and you not do your job also. You have to do better. And so I think that's the reason why a lot of this stuff goes and goes and goes, and it goes in the ear and on out the other. And we, as people in the Americas, in the US, have now been numbed, overwhelmed, stunned, assaulted, traumatized by this orange menace. And so that's why Richard Nixon, 46 years ago today, on this very date, had some humility. This guy now would never resign with all the criminality he's done. And people ask questions like, well, if Fox News was around in 1974, would Nixon have stayed in the White House? My answer is no. Nixon had principle, at least, in that moment, right? To know when the chips were down against him, he had to go. And he talked about a part-time Congress, and we need to have a full-time Congress, he said. Well, if Nixon had a part-time Congress, he would stay. It's not Fox News. So you're asking the wrong, and there are people who I respect who are asking the wrong question. The question is, if Nixon had the Mitch McConnell Senate right now, would Nixon still have been there in the White House in 1974 and beyond? Would he have finished that second term out? And I think he probably would have. Maybe he would have, right? Maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't. Because Mitch McConnell would not have made that walk that Barry Goldwater made into the Oval Office to Nixon and said, hey, your numbers are, the numbers are bad. Mr. President, numbers ain't looking good for you. And the Congress is not going to, you're not going to, Mitch McConnell's not going to do that because the Republican Congress, the Republican Senate at least, they acquitted this guy this year. People have already forgotten that 52 Republican, some people have already forgotten that 52 Republican senators did acquit Donald Trump here in 2020 of abuse of power. And of those 52 who are running for office this November, every single one of them pretty much is going to be drummed out of office as punishment. Well, they were going to be drummed out anyway, but as punishment for aiding and abetting this criminality that he continues to do. They also have the blood of 163,000 or 162,000 people on their hands. These Republican senators who voted to acquit him. So, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the reason why this stuff goes in one ear and out the next for the average everyday person here in the U.S. So, that's my thought on Richard Nixon and on what's going on right now in the White House. And I would say that Donald Trump is not running that White House. It's Stephen Miller who's running that White House right now. It's Steve Bannon who's running that White House right now. It's Bill Barr who is running that White House right now. It's not Donald Trump. It's not. He's as dangerous as all three of those people are. But the thing is, all three of those individuals have more intelligence than Donald Trump does. So that's really the encapsulation of the whole scenario of Richard Nixon and Fox News and Donald Trump and all of this, and the way the media's been behaving and the way the American public reacts to all of this. Well, the real test for the American public is how the American public reacts this November. This November. And Fox News is only as strong as its audience. The mentality of Fox News won't necessarily go away, but if the audience went away, Fox News would have to change somehow. So I don't think so much the question is, well, if Fox News were around, would Nixon still be in there? The real question is, if Mitch McConnell and this Republican Senate was around in 1974, would Nixon have finished his term? I think that's the question you ask. Next, oh yes, the two states. Welcome back. Now on to voting, and we are at the N stage, not the end stage, the N stage, the letter N. So these two states are Nebraska and Nevada. Nebraska, for you voters out there in Nebraska who may be listening, if you know someone in Nebraska, make sure you pass on this message to them. On your internet, if you have internet access, you go to your browser, type in SOS, Save Our Souls, sos.nebraska.gov. That's sos.nebraska.gov. And voila, you get the Nebraska Secretary of State, Robert Evnen. And he's smiling at you there. And you scroll down the page and voila, Nebraska online voter registration. It couldn't be any easier than this. What do you see as you scroll a little bit more beneath Nebraska online voter registration? Register to vote online. It's right there. It's so easy. Click on it. You click on it. It takes you to the online voter registration area. And on the left-hand side, you'll see these 9 steps of what you can expect as you go through the process, what you're going to be asked. And then on the right-hand side, you will see some information there. And then the button continue. So you click on the continue button, and then you begin to answer the questions there and follow the prompts. It's just really easy. Oh my gosh. That is it's really good. I mean, just go to sos.nebraska.gov. And when you go to sos.nebraska.gov, before you even get to the part where you see the smiling face of Robert Evnen smiling at you, there is a tab just above him in blue that says early voting. Oh goodness, this is so good. It's not the most attractive website, the most eye-catching website, but it's the website that you need if you are in Nebraska and you need to know about early voting or registering. It's incredible. You can go to the early voting tab and it gives you all the early voting dates and deadlines. Incredible. July 6th, 2020. First day to accept early voting ballot requests for the general election. September 28th of this year, coming up next month. Early voting ballots begin to be mailed out. So Nebraska is going to start mailing out the early voting ballots on September 28th of this year. If you are somebody who is uncomfortable even with that because you think that is too late, given what you know about what the crony Trump, crony Trump, postmaster, Louis DeJoy, is doing to slow down the mail because he's doing that. I've only had one piece of mail in a whole week, by the way. Can I just say that? There has only been one piece of mail that has come here within a whole week. That is slowing down the mail, folks. This is real, and I'm talking about here in California. So if it's happening in California, it is happening everywhere. People are, this is not a joke. So if you in Nebraska are uncomfortable with September 28th and you think that's too late and not early, please contact the folks in Nebraska. Contact Robert Evnan, the Secretary of State, and tell him, or his office. There's phone numbers there, 402-471-2554. Ask to speak to him. Ask to speak to someone in the office. Tell them, I want my ballot before September 28th. I don't want to wait until then for you to mail it to me. I actually would like to pick one up now. Can I go and pick one up now from your office? Go to your county election office as well. Ask them. You can apply for an early voting form on that early voting page. This is just great, though. You see all this information. October 5th, early voting in county election offices begins. October 23rd, last day to request a ballot to be mailed to you. Do not wait. Do not wait for that. Last day to vote early in a county election office. So look, early voting begins in October. October 5th, 2020 is the first day of early voting in Nebraska. That's the point you need to know. That's the takeaway you need to know. Let's go to Nevada. Now, with Nevada, here's what happens. You go to N as in Nancy, V as in Victor, SOS, NVSOS.gov/SOS/elections. That brings you to the Nevada Secretary of State, Barbara Sagavsky. You will see the word elections right in front of you. You will see the word voter registration search. You can search for your registration. There are these other kind of rather amateurish looking graphics on the front there that talk about voter information, election information, and all that, and voter registration stats and all this. Then on the left side, there's something about voters, celebration of women's suffrage. And then you click on that tab for voters on the left side. And then you will see voter registration, register to vote, check your voter registration, update it, register to vote by mail. Then there's a category that will say how and where to vote, early vote in person. And you just follow those appropriate prompts. Now, where it says early vote in person, I'm clicking on that here. And you can early vote in person in Nevada starting on October the 17th for the November 3rd general election. You've got 2 weeks to do that. So you can vote early in Nevada starting October 17th through October the 30th of this year for the November 3rd general election. So that's Nevada. That's as easy as it gets. That's a pretty easy, comprehensive look. And it's really a quick one. It's not that comprehensive at all. It's actually quite quick. But again, it's not the greatest website in terms of the visual aesthetic of it. But the point is that you're not looking for the visual aesthetic. You're looking for the information. And you can get this information by going to the website nvsos.gov/SOS/elections. And wow, once you go through that, it's really a walk in the park. Next up, I Am Not Your Negro. And a few comments about last night's conversation about that film.
We must realize this, that no other country in the world has been so fat, and so sleek, and so safe, and so happy, and so irresponsible, and so dead. No other country can afford to dream of a Plymouth and a wife and a house with a fence and the children growing up safely to go to college and to become executives and then to marry and have the Plymouth and the house and so forth. A great many people cannot live this way and cannot imagine it and do not know that when we talk about democracy, this is what we mean. To watch the TV screen for any length of time is to learn some really frightening things about the American sense of reality. We are cruelly trapped between what we would like to be and what we actually are. And we cannot possibly become what we would like to be until we're willing to ask ourselves just why the lives we lead on this continent are mainly so empty, so tame, and so ugly. These images are designed not to trouble, but to reassure. They also weaken our ability to deal with the world as it is, ourselves as we are.
Those are two clips from Raoul Peck's documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, featuring the narration there of Samuel L. Jackson, narrating the words of James Baldwin. I Am Not Your Negro is a 2016 documentary, and it is available now on Netflix. You may be able to find it on other streaming platforms, including perhaps PBS and Independent Lens. Independent Lens was one of the producers or one of the organizations under the PBS umbrella that architected the production of this film, I Am Not Your Negro, a very important documentary. And I have talked about that documentary on a number of occasions here on this podcast, and also recorded a commentary for the film back in 2017, a feature-length commentary that is on YouTube. I will link to it in the liner notes of this episode on Apple and elsewhere, wherever you get your podcasts. And I think because it is 2020, I will do a brand new feature-length commentary of that film as well. That's going to be, I guess, in the next little while. I don't know exactly when I'm going to do it, but I will, because I think it's very important. Even though I don't necessarily think that there's any updating, sadly, that needs to really be done beyond, of course, the dead body count of black people who, as James Baldwin reminds us in this film, when the corpses continue to speak to you. And last night I had occasion to host a event that was put on by the Mechanics Institute Library, and a number of individuals there who were very much a great help to me. Matt Kennedy and Pam Troy and Laura Shepard and Michael Fox, all of whom played a role in putting this all together, and also getting me involved in it and asking me to guest host. And it was a very kind thing. So I guest hosted this forum. It went on for an hour and a half. It was only supposed to go for an hour, and it went for an hour and a half to show you it was well attended. There was a good... This is for a Friday night on Zoom. There were at least 52 people, maybe 54 people, at least 52 in that chat room. I think that's actually a really good number. It may not be the thousands that big organizations get, or people who are very prominent get, far more prominent than yours truly. But I think for a Friday night to get 52 people, I think is really good. It's a definite start. And I'm sure there are people who listen to this podcast who either themselves get bigger audiences than that for Zoom, or people they know who do it, or famous people who do. I'm sure they do. I know they do. But the point is that this was a really well-attended event, and people asked a lot of questions and made a lot of comments last night. And I think those two clips are very important, by the way. And I shouldn't escape those clips and not talk about them, because the first clip about what we mean by democracy, and that the country, being the United States, has been so lazy and empty and so really soulless, quite frankly, is really true. And if you hear Joe Biden talking about we need to redeem the soul of the nation. Even the late great John Lewis said this. We need to redeem the soul of the nation, redeem the soul of America. But what if, and I tweeted this on my Twitter account at the Popcorn REEL, what if the soul of the nation is violence, genocide, enslavement, and racism? Because it is, right? The soul of the United States of America is violence, genocide, enslavement, and racism. Those are the things that the United States was founded upon. America belonged to the Native Americans. And the Native Americans had that land stolen from them. They were genocided as well. The Native Americans had that land taken from them, and they were genocided. And then black people were kidnapped and enslaved, brought here from the African continent, and for 300 years were forced under the threat of death, under the penalty of death, to build a nation anew on top of stolen land. And for 300 years, they were forced into enslavement and never paid for their work, ever. 300 years of free, Free, labor. Never compensated for it, not to this very day. Still, no reparations, nothing. That's the soul of our nation. And then the racism, of course, that's gone throughout forever here. And Jim Crow and discrimination, and we're going to stop you from voting. Lynchings, Emmett Till, everybody, all black women being lynched and raped and murdered by these white men who had them as their quote unquote property, or they really were property to white men. White men raping black women. I mean, come on, you want to talk about who is the biggest rapist on the block, and I condemn all of it. And you want to talk about rape in this country? For 300 years, black women were absolutely savaged by savages. These white men who would absolutely violate the black woman and her personhood at any turn. Whenever this man wanted to rape a black woman, whenever that happened, whenever that white man wanted to do that, that happened for 300 plus years. Don't tell a black woman to save America. I've had it with that. I've talked about this before. I talked about this last night at the event. And these two pieces of video from I Am Not Your Negro, the second one, which goes into, the emptiness of the soul of the country. We're bamboozled by reality TV and game shows, which to me are an equivalent of the American horror movie. I mean, not the serious American Horror Story. I'm talking about, this is one aspect. I mean, the enslavement, obviously, and the genocide and the rape and the brutalization of black human beings, of black people, is the horror movie, right? And of Native Americans, that's the horror movie. They said it's not a movie, this happened. But this second clip that I played, that you just heard, and you've got to watch this film, I Am Not Your Negro. You just have to watch it, please, on Netflix. Watch it, please. And this video, the second video clip that I played, the audio of which you heard, is a part of the American horror movie. This reality TV and game show stuff that permeates the airwaves and that keeps us in this stupor of fantasy, what we would like to be, as you heard Samuel L. Jackson say. This kind of fantasy of what we would like to be. And it keeps us from looking at who we really are, this lack of self-examination. And so last night I was hosting this conversation that was going on after most people watched the film, and it was an overwhelmingly white audience that was in attendance. And some of the questions I thought were very good. Some of the comments were very heartfelt and sincere. There was one woman who completely broke down into tears because she, this was so much pain. And it's not that she didn't realize it, she knew it and she'd seen it, but it was the way that this film presented all of this to her that completely flooded her. And she had known this truth for years. And I didn't ask her what she was doing to try to educate or counteract any of this, because I was taking the position last night of, as I do, is to allow for people to make their comments. And unless there's something egregiously wrong or, just not based on any fact, I was not really going to get in the way and respond in any way. I mean, I did respond to the comments, but not with any intent to castigate anybody. But there were reactions like that. There were reactions from people to my presentation, but also to, obviously, the film itself and what this film means. And I thought there were some very good points made and comments made. And one of the things I said is that whiteness is a mentality. It is not about a race. And as James Baldwin, without giving anything away, James Baldwin in many places has postulated the same thing. In fact, James Baldwin's an anti-racist educator. He was. And I think one of the best anti-racist educators ever was James Baldwin. And also someone who is still living, the great Jane Elliott, who I have interviewed on this podcast. I interviewed her back in, I believe it was June of this year, 2020. May have been July, but I think it was June. Would have been June, I think. May or June I think it would have been June of this year. And she says the very same thing, that there's no such thing as a race. This thing about the white race, it's just complete nonsense. This is about the human race. And I used to look at that and go, years ago, I would look at that and go, the human race, well, we're not being treated as a member of the human race as black folk. And we're not. That still exists. But that does not necessarily take away from the point that Jane Elliott and James Baldwin and Dick Gregory and others are making and have made, which is that we are a human race. There isn't a black or white. That's created artificially. Jane Elliott, as I found out, said, no, this is a lie. It's lies. It's not about a construct. It's about a lie. And she's right. She corrected me about that on the podcast. And quite frankly, rightly so. We get hooked into this form of language that is very poisonous to us. And that, in fact, on that note, I actually corrected someone. I did correct two people. One who had said something about, well, black people only came into the UK in the 1950s. And I had to say to him diplomatically that, no, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not refuting what you said about Antigua and things of that nature, but there are two important books that you should read that go into detail about black people living in the United Kingdom that will refute what you're saying. And I gave him the books. The books are Black Tudors by Miranda Kaufman, and her last name has two N's on the end of it. And the other book is called Black Britannia by Edward Scobie, and his last name is S as in Sam, Cobie. I used to have Edward Scobie as a professor many moons ago, by the way. And he's no longer with us. But Professor Edward Scobie is one of the great scholars, as is Miranda Kaufman. And I told, and he's a white guy who said this during the Zoom event last night, and I asked him, I said, well, you really should, I recommend strongly that you read these two books. And, so I had to do that. And then the other thing I did was, in one case, a woman was talking about slaves. And she hadn't seen the film yet. She promised to. And I really appreciated and respected, though, her comments and what she said. But I did say that even in this conversation, we have to really be aware of the language we are using. And it's more than semantics. This is not about semantics when I say this. This is about the language that we adopt in conversations like this, because that language reflects who the thinking is coming from, who the beholding and observing is coming from. And so she kept saying, well, she was telling these stories about Monrovia, and about enslavement, and about the Quakers and Pilgrims and all these kinds of things that she was talking about. And she kept saying slaves. And I said, well, yes, but really the language that we should be using is enslaved, the enslaved people, because these people were human beings. These people had a culture. These people had a religion and a language and a whole continent. In the African continent, they had a history. They weren't just slaves. And they definitely didn't look at themselves that way. So if you're talking about quote unquote slaves, what you're doing is adopting the language and viewpoint of the enslaver, of the slave master, so to speak, because that's what he looked at them as, right? They're my slaves. Come over. That's how he's viewing this. And even though I'm sure this woman was not, I would guess that she didn't have the mindset that was saying, well, these are, we adopt this language in the culture that I think is very damaging. This systemic language. The same thing, as I said, reminded her too about what these media organizations do. When they don't call out racism, they say things like racially tinged, like the New York Times does, like CNN does. Racially incendiary, all these cutesy, sounding words, these euphemisms, instead of just getting to the heart of everything. And that's one of the things that does damage. And I think the central question that comes out of this film, the central question that James Baldwin has asked, is when will white people challenge themselves, and not only challenge themselves, but purge this terror in their minds out? When will that ever happen? And I think that's a really important question, because as long as the everyday white person carries around in their mind this dread image of black people, you cross the street wherever you see a black person, if you're a white woman in particular, you clutch your handbag when you see a black man walking, if you are a white woman, you somehow turn around and pretend you forgot something if you are a white woman and you see a black man walking. And that's day or night. That has got nothing to do with, it's at night. This happens in the cold light of day. Heck, it happens in the mornings. I mean, I even here now, I have seen this. When I walk down the street, I will see that happen. White woman, I forgot something, turn around and pretend that you forgot something. And then as soon as I've walked past you, you go along your way. Or you cross the street. Or you clutch your handbag. Where's that come from? You're more likely. See, the thing is, white women who do this, they are more likely to be abused by their boyfriends or husbands in their own homes than they are by any black man walking anywhere. So why this reflexive clutching of your handbag? Who taught you that? Where did that come from? Yeah, I know the society. I get it. And maybe your parents, right? But that's in your mind. Who put that there? And why haven't you been able to purge yourself of that? The people who say that they are, oh, I'm not a racist. Well, that's not good enough, as you know. It's anti-racist. Thank you very much. I am an anti-racist. That's the language. Speaking of language. But you have to work as an anti-racist, or if you aspire to be one and you're white, you have to work to get that image of a black person out of your head. You have to confront yourself and ask, why do I think that about black people? Why am I clutching my handbag? Why are you doing that? You've got this, and white men too, you've got this image of a black person in your mind. And you've used that, and you are oppressing yourself. And in the same process, you are also oppressing black people. Because as long as you won't let go of this boogeyman that you have created and perpetuated in order to justify your oppression of black people, as long as you carry that around and you fail to get rid of that, you will never free yourself. And black folks will never be free in this country. You'll have black people not be free. You'll have white people not be free because they've got this mental image that they can't get rid of, and quite frankly, don't want to get rid of. It's a boogeyman that makes them feel safe, but it's also an entrapment of their souls because they don't even realize that they are being imprisoned themselves by their own making. And yet, these two clips I played, the house, the car, the two children, the dog, the white picket fence, and yet you're still unhappy. The money. You think that Donald Trump is happy? I know he's not I know he's not a billionaire. He's not a real billionaire at all. He has money, but he's not a billionaire. That's garbage. Bankrupt 6 businesses, including a casino. How freaking stupid can you be? Do you think Donald Trump is happy? Come on, folks. He's an imposter in the White House, right? He's got, anything that he wants. He's the most powerful human being, scumbag on this planet. Do you think that's a happy human being? Really? 163,000 people dead of coronavirus? Doing nothing when Putin puts bounties on the heads of U.S. military personnel? Do you really think this guy's happy? Caging brown kids on the border? Putting them in concentration camps? Really? And this is what James Baldwin's speaking to, right? This idea that the average white person is living this fantasy, which they are. Oh, this is such a great country. Is it? And then you refuse to look at what the so-called great country is, the enslavement. You refuse. There's not been anything done about reparations, nothing, to address the enslavement, the brutality, the discrimination, the centuries of it, the centuries of enslavement, the Native Americans genocided, their land stolen from them. Nothing's been. Where's the redress for that? See, that's the thing. That's what I'm talking about now. This failure of the average white person to reconnect with themselves, to look into themselves, to look within. And I get it. There are people on a personal level. We all have difficulties being introspective or excavating. Yeah, that takes work. But I'm not talking about it on that level. I'm talking about your relationship to what is going on in front of you right before your eyes. That's what I'm talking about. A world, a country crumbling around you, right before you. And what are you doing about it? Sure, there's the 25% of you who are marching, getting in the streets, doing things. I get it. And there are people who have sacrificed their lives. There's always been a history of that. You have a few members of the white populace who really do believe, truly believe in justice and freedom for black people. And to the point which they give up their lives for that. Heather Heyer, Summer Taylor, Viola Luiso. These are 3 white women I've just mentioned. James Reeb, a white man. Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, 2 Jewish men, white men. In Mississippi in 1964, you had James Chaney, African-American man, and so many other black people who died, right? Died for Black Lives Matter, which is a 400 plus years old movement. And this is the other thing I want to say, which I didn't bring up last night. Why did it take most white people 400 years? Now, of course, no one's 400 years old, but you get what I'm saying. Why does it take white Americans 400 years to even say the words Black Lives Matter, let alone act to be anti-racist and to take this demonization that they've created of black people in their movies, in TV, in the news? The Willie Horton ad, George H.W. Bush. I mean, come on, folks. The Willie Horton ad is a same projection. It's just an external projection of the internal dread that they carry about black people, that the average white person carries. Even the white person that claims that they are all about justice and freedom for black folk carries this in their heads. And I said to the audience last night, this will not get solved. This problem we have in this country, and it goes deeper than race. It's about a whiteness. It's a systemic whiteness. It's a mentality that absolutely cripples the white mind. James Baldwin's written about this too, by the way. It cripples and they've imprisoned themselves with this. And they think that they are so free and so privileged, and maybe there's privilege, but it's also white, as Jane Elliott said. And she's a white woman who is an anti-racist educator. She's been an anti-racist educator now for 52 years. You should read her. Go to her website, janeelliott.com. 2 T's with her last name, janeelliott.com. Go to her website and look at the work she's done. Go YouTube her and her experiment, the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment. Brown eyes, blue eyes. She's been doing this work since 1968. And here we are in 2020. Nothing has changed in this perspective. Now, there may be some cosmetic changes or some meaningful changes, but we've backslid. The images of 1963 of a black woman with a knee on her neck have not changed in 50 odd years. George Floyd. Same difference. So when I say that, when you hear people say we've got work to do, white people are the we. And as some of the white people that I spoke to last night realized, and I really appreciated that they realized this, but the realization's not enough. The work has to be done as well. But it's always a start when you realize that you have to do the work. Now you've got to actually do it. But one of the white men said, one of the white men in this forum said, look, we white people really have to wake up and get our shit together. That's his quote. I'm quoting him. And he's absolutely right. Do you want to see the country fail and perish? Because that's the key. And I'm not even just talking about November of this year with the vote and the choice you've got to make there in the voting booth. I'm talking about beyond that, because no matter who is in the White House, whether we got 4 more years of this scumbag, which I don't think we'll have, or whether we have 4 years of Joe Biden at least, which I do think we're going to have. I'm very confident about that. These same issues are not going to be going away. These issues are not going to disappear on January the 20th, 2021 at 12 o'clock high noon Eastern time, when Joe Biden's sworn in. That is not going to, trust me, that is not going to magically get rid of. If people thought that racism was going to disappear because Barack Obama was sworn in and as the first African American president. There are people who actually think like this. There are actually articles in prominent newspapers in the United States talking about post-racial. And then you have black scholars globbing onto that, some of them. And then the others of them rightfully looking at that with side-eye, going like, what the hell are you talking about? But look, all of this is to say, and I could go on for a long time on this, but all of this is to say that the conversation was really very good last night. And I want to thank each and every person again here on this podcast now. Thank each and every person for participating. There were a lot of people asking questions and making comments. And one of the things, though, that I do get a little irked at, to be honest, this was about the movie I Am Not Your Negro and about anti-blackness and anti-black racism. And there was a woman, a white woman, who said that she was Jewish, and she said, well, can we talk about anti-Semitism and what anti-Semitism and racism, but can we talk about anti-Semitism and what your advice is to try to get rid of it? And I told her, I said, look, it starts with each and every one of us. It starts with each and every one of us. We have to confront anti-Semitism just like we have to confront all forms of racism. And if you see someone in your presence saying something that's anti-Semitic, you have the duty to, not just the right, but the duty, as Dr. King would say, the duty, he would say, to confront them and say, look, that's anti-Semitic, and I'm not going to sit by and let you say that without responding to you. And that's not something I appreciate when you say that. Or when you say, if someone says something racist, don't sit at your workplace and let that pass. Because that is your moment where you fail. So I said that to her, and I spoke to her, and she told me she had been the victim of some anti-Semitic comments here in San Francisco. Just the other day, someone said some very nasty things about her. And I apologize. I said, I'm sorry I hear that. I'm sorry that you heard that happened to you, I should say. But I think the thing that, and I told her that I had done some episodes on anti-Semitism. And I said that I thank you for your question. But I think what irks me is, why is it that when black people talk about racism, specifically when they talk about anti-black racism, why is it that a white person invariably will say to you, but what about this over here? What about that topic? I have an issue about this. And that's not to say that anti-Semitism is not racism. It is. But the subject matter of this Zoom discussion was not about anti-Semitism. It was not about a film like Shoah or a film like Schindler's List or a film like The Diary of Anne Frank or the book. The topic was James Baldwin and I Am Not Your Negro and anti-black racism in America. And the reason why I think that maybe this lady, but I think why many, if not this lady, but why many white people do that is because they are, quite frankly, afraid and uncomfortable with dealing with, confronting their own implication and their own complicity with anti-black racism. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. It's a coping mechanism, but it's a very poisonous one because it allows them an out. It allows them the ability to not want to deal with, to escape. I mean, that's a very poisonous form of white privilege in a way, too. I can just go point over here at that. And God bless her heart, Ellen Pompeo, you got to follow her on Twitter. I really wish that she didn't have the same last name as the corrupt Secretary of State, but that's a whole nother story. But Ellen Pompeo, the actor and I'd say educator as well, and she's on Twitter at that same handle, I think, is the same, all one word, is an anti-racist. That is a white woman who is really an anti-racist as well. She is. And she talks about this. In fact, she talked about this to Jamel Hill, the great Jamel Hill, who has a podcast as well. I think it's called, I don't want to get it wrong, but you can go to Jamel Hill on Twitter at JemelEhill. And Ellen Pompeo was on there this week, and she was talking about the same thing. You know, she says that as a white person, she's fed up with white people doing this, switching the subject when it's about racism and it's about white people doing these racist things. There's, you know, she talked about it. There's going to be that, you know, the white person that switches the subject to talk about something else. And she analogized fruit. You know, if I'm sitting here saying I like oranges, I think she said, you know, why the hell are you going to ask me what about bananas? If I'm sitting here talking about oranges and I like oranges and we need to protect oranges, what the heck? Why are you coming up with, well, what about bananas? I like bananas too, I think she said to Jamel Hill. But I'm not talking about bananas. I'm talking about oranges, you know? And white people do this. Not every white person, but a great many white people do this. Invariably, the person that interrupts you or asks you a question about something else is going to be a white person. And the reason why I think they do it is because they are uncomfortable. And it is a time out for them. It is designed to get you to talk about something else. And although in this case that something else was anti-Semitism, and I was quite happy to talk about it for about 5 minutes. That's where the length of this interaction went for. And while I have done episodes on it, and I will do more episodes dealing with anti-Semitism and what we need to do, and then get some people on to talk about this. You know, while I'm going to do that, and I will continue to do that, and I will continue to fight against anti-Semitism wherever I see it and call it out, what I see a pattern of, and what I really kind of bristle at, is you can't recognize you can't listen long enough to my pain or my issues or the things that are important to me, right? And I began the Zoom talk by saying all lives do not matter unless and until Black lives matter as well. And I said all Black lives matter. I made that very clear before as I started. And it was a majority white audience. And again, I appreciate the audience being there and listening, and then really getting some great questions and comments. And there was an Asian woman as well who I thought said some really important things as well. When you divert the conversation to an issue that is not part of the reason why you are here and why I am here, and if the forum is about anti-Black racism, can we just focus on that? Can we do that? I mean, that would be very respectful. Case in point, I went last year to a forum on anti-Semitism. And the topic was the rise of and the resurgence, I guess. I think it was called the resurgence of anti-Semitism in the United States, in political circles and beyond. You know, you had the Tree of Life shooting massacre, the terrorist massacre of Jewish people at the Tree of Life synagogue in October 2018. We're almost 2 years on from that, my goodness. You had the comments that politicians were making, some of the things that Ilhan Omar said that I thought came really close to the line, and I would say were on that line. You know, they really were. Quite frankly, they really were. And I can see why people said that was anti-Semitic, even whether or not she had the intention or not. And I know there were some Jewish people who disagreed, who said, oh no, what she said wasn't. I think it's very close. I think it's a close call for me personally. But I'm a black man, right? So and I'm not Jewish, because there are black people who are Jewish, so, let's not make out that only white individuals are Jewish, But my point here is, I went to a forum last year on anti-Semitism and, again, the resurgence of anti-Semitism in America. And I was probably I remember myself being the only black person in that room of about 400 people. And I sat and I listened. I learned. Not once did I raise my hand and say, but what about black people? What about this racism? What about anti-black racism? Not once. Why would I? This is a forum about anti-Semitism, right? So I sat, I listened, I learned. If anything, I would have asked a question about something that may have been said, or I wanted to learn more. So that would be the only reason I'd put my hand up. But me as a black man, as a black person, I am not going to go to a forum that talks about the resurgence and rise again of anti-Semitism in the United States and put my hand up and go, but what about black people over here? What about these black people being oppressed? That's not what I'm going to do. Now, someone else might do that. I'm not. This forum is about the rise of anti-Semitism. This forum is not about black men or black women or black people in general. So why can't people, particularly white people, for the most part, because she was the only person that did this, everybody else did not. So I think they get it, right? But why is there always this subset of white people who do this? When there's an anti-black racism discussion going on, i.e., I Am Not Your Negro, and people's responses to the film. And this woman hadn't even seen the film, quite frankly, so that's another probably part of the reason why she said what she said. But there is invariably people who will do this. Anyway, I think I've gone on a little bit too long about all of that, but the forum last night was very good. And I just thank everybody for being part of it. But I hope that it's not the end of it, right? I mean, the question is, what will white people do? What will those white individuals from last night, what will they do? So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I want to just thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat podcast. And I hope that you think about these issues, think about these things, and make sure you register to vote. Follow me on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Thank you again for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.